The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Although this is commonly referenced amendment and subject to much debate and discussion, Thomas Lewis says in his book, The Bill of Rights, that the Supreme Court took very little notice of this amendment until the beginning of the 20th century. This was not, he notes, for a lack of federal laws impinging on free speech, from the Sedition Act of 1798 and the Comstock Act of 1873 or the Alien Immigration Act of 1930, as well as a wide variety of postal regulations. The court never found any of these to be a violation of the First Amendment. Then, in the early 20th century, the First Amendment began to see more action in the court system and eventually became a hotly debated issue, particularly the free speech and freedom of religion clauses of the amendment. Several different means of constitutional tests have been used through the court throughout the 20th century to interpret the protections of the First Amendment. But despite all the attention the amendment has received in recent years, much of the amendment has been essentially overlooked or ignored. We tend to focus on the freedom of religion or freedom of speech portions of the amendment, but according to the article, The Democratic First Amendment, to understand this amendment correctly, we must take the whole thing into consideration together, including the press, assembly, and petition clauses that were included with the free speech and freedom of religion, if we are to understand the significance of this amendment. He says, quote, that it is best read to adopt a particular vision of citizenship, one associated with the democratic Republican philosophy of Thomas Jefferson and his allies. Citizens on this view are meant to be active in a myriad of ways, to engage with and even challenge their elected representatives, and to develop and communicate their values and opinions jointly through assemblies and associations. It stands in sharp contrast to the passive form of citizenship limited to biennial voting favored by Jefferson's Federalist adversaries, end quote. This is not just a protection of individual freedoms, but an encouragement to be active participants because these freedoms are protected. So while each of these clauses has an importance of its own, the amendment as a whole paints a picture of the active participation of the citizens in their government that was desired. Why is this important? Well, that freedom differentiates us from authoritarian states. And according to the article, The Present Importance of the First Amendment by Edward Cheney, he notes that in authoritarian countries, policy is reached by authority, not by argument. In a democracy, the people have the right, as in America, guaranteed by the First Amendment, to argue their views and have an effect on public policy through the right of free speech, the press, assembly, or the ability to petition freely. So while as Christians, or even as a nation, we tend to focus on the freedom of religion or the free speech clauses, it is important to understand the importance of the First Amendment as a whole, not just the individual clauses.